Hello, good afternoon. I am here today, September 6, 2009, with some amazing people. Leo Bretholz, who has been a participant in our project here at Goucher, the Oral History of the Holocaust. He is one of the survivors whom members of our class interviewed back in 2007. And beside me is Amber Keppel-Jones, who was one of the students we interviewed Leo, Tova Tenenbaum, another student, and Dr. Uta Larkey, who is the professor of the class. And I am Jennifer Zunikoff, who is the storytelling teacher and the coach. And we're here today because we want to interview Leo as a follow-up to the original interviews conducted by the students back in 2007. And we're going to ask him his thoughts about our project and these wonderful students and just participating and how he's doing now, 2 years later. And so we will begin.
Alright, so we talked about this question, Tova and I, earlier, and we really just wanted to know what it was like to watch us as we were performing.
You asked me the question?
When you came to the Friday night performance and you
put on
sat
the
there, we just were wondering, how was it to watch us being you, and was it strange? Did it feel like
It's
odd?
I would say it was a very good case of transposing. In other words, you reflected, you presented my case in a very normal and I would say very credible way. And whoever listened to you could come away with a great feeling of having lived through a period, the one that I lived through, because you did it in a very vivid and valid presentation. And it was emotional, naturally, that it is always. But to see young people relating to it and actually living the part and being me was exhilarating. Yes, if I can say that word, exhilarating. Yes.
Oh, we were also wondering, were you surprised by what we chose to represent? Like, I know, like in mine, I focused on the women in your life based on something that you told me in one of the interviews that I remember stood out so clearly to me, and I said, I want to structure my presentation around this. When you said, don't let anyone ever tell you that women are the weaker sex, they're the stronger sex. You said I was saved by women, and that struck a chord with me. And I remember with like Amber choosing her parts especially, like I really remember the part where when you went to the priest's house and he let you wash up. Like, were you surprised by what we picked out from your story?
Not, I was pleasantly, I was pleased. It was very nice that you picked these salient points, because that played a great part in my being able to survive in a way. With the very beginning, when my mother sent me away. That was a courageous act by our mother. We have a term in Hebrew in our liturgy. It's called Eshet Chayim, and that translates as woman of valor. This was a woman of valor. Same with Sister Jeanne d'Arc when she told me that I have nothing to fear, where she herself was maybe being watched. But when she told me that was an act of valor. And the priests, when they were hiding me, they took a chance. And he said to me, you gotta leave early, because the patrols come. You cannot afford to be found here. What he meant also, I cannot afford to be found hiding you. These two French priests, two in a row. And yeah, he said, wash up before we talk, wash up, because we smell the high heaven. But you picked some very good salient factors, and the whole story of surviving has all kinds of emotions. The very fact saying goodbye to the family is one emotion. The very tender part, say goodbye to my sister, a very tender part when she was 10, from the hospital window. Then came the very dramatic part, the very accelerating part, that's the escape. Then came a scary part, finding myself in front of a German officer who said, "You're a Jew, aren't you?" And I had to play, as I say, verbal gymnastics to get myself out of that situation. You know what I said to him? When he said, "You're a Jew," I had false papers, my French papers. I said, "Herr Kapitän, Herr Hauptmann, das fehlt mir jetzt noch, ein Jude zu sein." Translated. That's all I need now, to be a Jew yet on top of it. I was in enough trouble. You know, he bought that. And he slapped me and let me go. He could have said, "Drop your pants." And that would have been the end of me. But another bit of luck. 3 little 4-letter words. Fear made me run. Hope. The hope was to survive and be able to tell my mother eventually if I meet her again, "Thanks for sending me away." And the other 4-letter words was luck. It's luck in so many situations. And that's what it boils down to. And you picked 2 good instances. Yes, definitely. It was and that berets. This was so stylish. That was good for Elle magazine.
Yeah. I was happy that you let me borrow it. So.
This is the situation. This was the situation, and that's what we're talking about. And what you're doing, you're connecting the past in a very vivid way with the present, but it's going to go into the future. That's what it's all about, because we have to be sure that the term "never again" does not just remain a slogan, but it will be put into practice. To know. You haven't seen me since July, because in July I signed the book. I go twice a year to the Holocaust Museum to sign the book. I was there in July. There was a situation that touched me so deeply and gave me some hope for the future. I'm signing the books, and there's people standing in line, and a young man comes up to me. I couldn't converse with him a lot because people were standing in line. But as I opened the page and said, "Who do I make it out to?" He says, "Make it out to Kamal." Kamal is the same as Gamal in Arabic. It's the K, it takes the G, like Gaddafi can be Gaddafi. So he said, "Make it out to Kamal." So I realized he is from the Middle East. I said, "You are from the Middle East?" He says, "I'm Egyptian." And then he says to me, "Before you sign it, would you please write 'never again'?" Intrigued me. So he was walking around in the Holocaust Museum with friends or relatives. And I walked up to him and said, "Young man, come out. I'm very much intrigued, in fact, very pleased that you had that interest. What brings you to that point where you have that kind of interest?" He says, "When I heard the president of Iran, Ahmadinejad, deny the Holocaust, I wanted to learn about it and find out for myself. And I bought books and saw films and I read things. And when I came to Washington with friends or relatives, I decided I have to go to the Holocaust Museum and learn more. And your book will be an addition." And he says, "I want you to know, Mr. Bretholz, from now on, I will make sure that the truth will be told. Is that beautiful? One book, one man, one young man, about 19, one young man. This is what it's all about. He will take it into the future, just like you did with your presentation. This isn't for today. Today and yesterday is gone. This is really for the future. But isn't it an interesting thing when you see that happen in Washington? The museum attracts 85% of the people attracting are not Jewish. And they're walking by there. And I'm going there sometimes with schools, sometimes when I sign my books and I accompany some friends to the exhibit. And I look at that exhibit and I see that para-scientific, pseudo-scientific thing of racial, who qualifies as an Aryan, cheekbones and eyebrows and noses and ears and eye colors. And I see people walk by. And I say to myself, the majority of the people walking by here would not have passed that test. If they had lived in Germany, they would have been considered Untermenschen, subhuman. They're looking at it, they may not even think about it. When I see them and I see that and I know what my experiences were, I know they wouldn't have survived. But that's what we're dealing with. Pass it on to the future. As I said, never again has to be put into practice. And you're doing it. Talk too much.
Selena,
It's all about you.
originally when we asked you to be part of this project, what were your feelings? So what did you expect?
Well, actually, I've had other interviews before, but this was a little bit special. But it was another interview with a little more, let me say, with a little more emphasis, a little more personal involvement, like acting it out, which in itself is also emotional. It's not just listening, Q&A, but they did something that was tangible, that other people can see and relate to. It's not just a conversation, and when the people leave, it's finished. This isn't finished because this goes on. So I was, being that I had done talks over the years, this was just another aspect, except it was a little more novel. Yeah.
That was my question too, that like, because you're so active and you've done so many talks and I'm sure you've been interviewed so many times. It was just about how ours was different.
Well, you came to the house, we sat down, we had a friendly talk, it was very personal, one-to-one, social get-together in a way. There were the three of you. Yes.
Was it also something about our age, about the fact that we were younger?
You know what, because my experiences were always from middle school to high school. Sometime I don't accept a call for a talk because either I can't do it or it's just not. For instance, when I speak to a teacher and the teacher doesn't know much, I ask it. I didn't accept it. The teacher asked me where I was from. I was born in Austria. When did you leave Austria? I said, after the Anschluss. She says, what's the Anschluss? The teacher. I had to explain to her the annexation of Austria by Germany. But most of my time, I said, I didn't spend in Nazi Germany. I spent in Vichy France, under the Vichy regime. No, the teacher asked me, what's the Vichy regime? With a teacher like this, I don't want to talk to. I really, these kids probably didn't know one iota of what was. They should be prepared in some way. They should be primed to what they're going to hear, what they're going to learn. There should have been already a few units of teaching. But with that teacher, I knew I was running into a wall. So I said, no, I can't make it, but I suggested somebody else. I think I suggested Amy Mogolinsky. Amy is good too. She has a good story. Do you know, are you familiar with the story of Nicholas Winton? You know Nicholas Winton. The fellow, the Englishman, he's now 100 years old. He's the one that brought these youngsters, about 600 or 900, 700 or 800, whatever kids, from Czechoslovakia to England. And he was a 23-year-old stockbroker. And when he found out what happened, he went over there and arranged what they called a Kindertransport. And he brought these kids over there. And he never talks about it, but he made notes. One day, his wife found these notes in the attic. And she says, Nicholas, you never talked to me about that. He says, well, there was nothing to talk about. It's just... But he had made notes with names and the addresses of people, families to whom he assigned these kids to. Nicholas Winton, W-I-N-T-O-N, is now 100. He's been honored, he's been knighted in England. I think the United States has given him an award. Just this past week, he and a group of the people that he had saved then as children went back to Prague and retraced the step with a train from Prague to Holland to England. That was reported. Maybe I can send it to you by email.
Yeah.
And we have a friend who lives in Bethesda. Are you familiar? Do you know Alice Masters? Her husband is originally from Vienna. Peter Masters died a couple of years ago, unfortunately, wonderful man. She was in a Kindertransport. She and her sister now lives in England. And 10 years ago, when he was 90, they had a meeting in London, big hall, and Nicholas Winton was there ostensibly for his 90th birthday to honor him. He didn't know the whole arrangement. On both sides of him, to the left and the right in the first row, and he didn't know that, were two women whom he saved then as children. This was also a video that was made. We have that video. And at one point, a woman doing the emceeing, so Sir Winton, no, at that time he was not knighted yet, Mr. Winton, you have done a great service to these people, saving them. You don't know how much good, oh, he shrugs this off. He's into gardening and doing menial things. This is not, doesn't even want to hear about it. Mr. Winton, would you turn to your right, please? And there's this woman, and she reaches out and hugs him. She says, my name is, and you saved me. Then the lady sat on the stage. She says, now turn to your left. There was another woman sitting there, hugging. And then the house lights go on. And she says, anybody else here who was saved by Mr. Winton in that Kindertransport? A lot of people stood up. Survivors. And she says, Mr. Winton, please turn around. And he did. He went like this, tears streaming down his cheeks. Such an emotional thing, and a beautiful thing. But what one man can do, see, what one man, he or Schindler can do, that's, we wish there could have been more of these people, you know. But unfortunately, that's why the few that did it stand out. And that's all it amounts to. People doing the right thing. What did Edmund Burke said, the philosopher? The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing.
Yeah.
It's a great saying, isn't it?
Mm.
And when somebody does something that stands out, but this was such a beautiful, emotional thing. We hope to hear from Alice. She said she'll call us as soon as she gets back. But she probably is staying a little longer in England to visit with her sister. And Alice has a beautiful story, the Kinder Transport. And her husband wrote a book. Peter Masters, Fighting Back.
Mhm. Yeah, I think you mentioned.
Fighting Back.
Yeah,
Peter Masters wrote the book Fighting Back. These were commandos that were formed in England to land in Normandy with the invasion on June the 6th, 1944. And these commanders were all from Austria and Germany, German-speaking fellows. They were the special commander assigned to infiltrate, capture, and interrogate because they spoke German. Peter, when he talked, had one line that just, whenever I'm with Alice and we're together at a meeting, she says, Leo, you tell this story, I don't want to tell that story. When Peter spoke to people, he would say, we landed in Normandy, the cliffs, we had side weapons but no guns. We had bicycles over our shoulders because they were supposed to infiltrate. And we wore berets. And this is his line. And when the Germans, from their vantage point, saw us land and they saw this group of men with berets and bicycles, they knew right then and there that they were going to lose the war. That was Peter's line. Is that beautiful? Peter died of congestive heart failure 3 years ago. Left the house at 7 o'clock to go to play tennis. He left a note for his wife. Be back in a couple of hours. She never saw him again. He collapsed on the tennis court. Wonderful man, Peter. He also was translated into German. Das Kommando der Verfolgten, the commander of the persecuted. Beautiful, beautiful story, beautiful man. Wonderful stories he tells. Yeah, they knew right away they were going to lose the war. Took a while yet. By the way, what is today, the 6th?
Mm-hmm.
5 days ago was the 1st of September. That was when Germany attacked Poland.
75.
On Friday, September the 1st. It's interesting that they entered Austria on Friday, the 11th of March. They attacked Belgium on Friday, the 10th of May. And the armistice was signed on a Friday in Compiègne. Isn't that right? Hitler had an astrologer who told him this is his lucky day. And whenever the generals would say, Führer, the weather is not conducive, we can't have this, we can't do this or that, it's Friday. Look at the record, it's an idiosyncrasy. It's interesting. Friday, March the 11th, when I was 17. I just turned 17. Oh, time flies. Where did it go? Where did it go?
Yeah, we all ask this question, but you make the best of it.
Trying the best. 88, my gosh.
May I jump in?
What?
I don't know.
Go ahead, I'm talking too
No,
much.
this is what this is about, for us to have a conversation.
It's awesome.
So feel free if you have, I don't know if you have anything or you just want to go back and forth.
Go
I'm still
ahead.
thinking that you
Yeah,
you
that's
have a
fine.
question.
I'm just thinking about your humor, Leo, and how when Amber and Tova and Jenny were working on the story back in 2007, your humor was so apparent through their story, and also the tragedy, and also your persona, your aura, your emotion, your connection to your family, your mother and your father, and how this is all woven together in one person is one of the miracles of this project, to be to see that through these young people. Can you talk a little bit about that, about humor as far as when you share your story, and specifically with them, as you said, this was different. They were in the intimacy of your living space.
Yeah. I like to throw in my wife doesn't particularly like it. Leo, enough with the jokes already, because she's heard them so often. Humor gets you over the hump, I think. Humor is part of survival. I think so. There's a saying, part of humor is smiling. They say, if you're too busy to smile, you're too busy. Right? All it takes is just move your lips and you smile. But humor is helps to overcome. And in our tradition, Jewish tradition, there's always a lot of often self-deprecation. We like to joke about ourselves. What do you call a fellow who sits in the synagogue and falls asleep when the rabbi gives a sermon? Did I tell you that one?
But I always forget. A sleeping Jew.
It's a play on words. What do you call a fellow? He sits in the synagogue, he falls asleep when the rabbi gives a sermon. A bored again Jew.
But follow up on this question. I mean, was it something that also in your home that your father or your mother were
my mother was trying to be lighthearted in spite of the fact that she became a widow at age 35. She was doing Weißnäherei, this stitching and doing buttonholes and monograms for trousseaux, for bridal trousseaux. And Weißnäherei, this is white stitching. And she always was either humming or whistling. And my father was an amateur actor in the Yiddish theater. So, and my father had a very dry sense of humor, but he was also very strict with me. When I didn't want to go to the tobacco shop to buy him a pack of cigarettes, I didn't want to go. He sent me to buy because I knew he was coughing, and the smoke bothered me. So I said no. I said to him, "You always send me. I always have to go." He says, "Yes, but you never go," because I always refuse. Sense of humor is part of getting over the hump. When we were in the camps, we always heard stories, and we told them, what they call it, Galgenhumor, gallows humor, black humor. Give you a couple of examples. During the blackout in France, during the war, blackout, civil defense, there's a train that rides from Paris to Lyon, from Lyon to Marseille, or whatever. And at that time, in 43 already, the Germans and the Italians were not in the best of terms. The Italians were in southern France occupying, but they were not as strict with the anti-Jewish laws, and then the Germans entered and took over for the Italians. So there was always that conflict between, even that dates back to the First World War, when the Italians, they call them Katzelmacher, like traitors, they turned over to the other side. But anyway, between the Germans and the Italians was always that little conflict. So the story goes, it's a train that goes at night from Paris to Lyon, let's say. It's nighttime, blackout, pitch black, and it goes through a tunnel yet, so it's really, you can't see a thing. In this compartment, 4 people. On one side, a woman in her 40s and her teenage daughter. On the other side, a German officer and an Italian officer. So it's dark. 4 people, nobody can see anything. All of a sudden, you hear 2 noises. One is the noise of a kiss, and the other one is like a slap. Everybody heard it, but nobody has seen anything. There's 4 people, there are 4 thoughts. The woman says to herself, why does he want to kiss my child when I am here, a woman in her prime, he can kiss me? The young lady says, what does he want from my mother, the old woman, when I am here, a young girl? The German officer says, it's funny, he kisses the woman and I get slapped. And the Italian says, these are sad days, you've got to kiss your own hand so that you can slap the German. Is that significant? And the other one is, after the battle, at the Battle of the Bulge. This was the decisive defeat in Christmas time, Belgium, 1944. The Germans at that time had people, young people of 16 and 17, and some of them 60s and 70s. They threw in everything they had to break through, eventually perhaps even get back to Paris. That was the fear, but it didn't happen. But the people that were very old in the 70s and 80s in Germany went into civil defense for local, safety. When they filled out the form for civil defense, they had to give first name, last name, civil state, married or whatever, birth date and everything. And then there was one question. Have you ever been in a concentration camp? And another one. Another question. If not, why not? This was another ghetto humor that we had. That went around in France, Wenn nicht, warum nicht? Is that interesting?
It actually reminds me of another question. Like every time that I talk with you, or every time that someone talks about your story, I learn something new. And I remember Uta had said something, that there was some part of her story that she hadn't known, or Steve or something, and that we talked about it in class, and you said, oh, I didn't know that. But I was wondering, you tell your story so frequently to so many different groups of people, and I was wondering, how do you change it, based on who's listening, and also has there ever been a time where you're telling your story and then you tell something and you realize you've never actually told that part of the story before?
Yeah, that depends. It is a very good question, because I speak extemporaneously. I have never any notes, but I tailor my speech to the audience. Students is different than adults. Mixed audiences, Jewish, Christian. In a church, it's different than in a synagogue. When I speak to Christian audiences, I try to emphasize the help that I got from Christian people, to tell them that, yes, at that time it was helpful, in spite of the fact that the Hitler Youth will march in the street singing, "Hängt die Juden, stellt die Pfaffen an die Wand." Meaning, hang the Jews and put the priests against the wall. This should have been a red flag. Should have been a warning to the Vatican. Hitler, he detested the church. He never even went to his mother's funeral. Catholic. But the Vatican should have noticed that. But instead, they concluded an agreement with the Vatican, with the German government called Concordat. Concordat means agreement in Latin. If you leave the churches alone, we will lay low on what you do to the Jews. You know, that was a little cowardly, but they don't want to dwell on that. But what I'm trying to say is that while this was going on, there were Christians who were helping. I was sheltered by Franciscan friars in the town of Trier. I was helped by priests when I was on the run, by a nun, a woman of valor, when I needed it most, in the most vulnerable moment of all my years of running, incapacitated, in a hospital, was just operated. Don't know who the doctor was that noticed. Do you know? And Sister Jeanne d'Arc was asked. That was in the interview we did when we went there with WBAL. That was taken out of that was edited out of and she was asked by Deborah Wiener, how did you know he was Jewish? She says, I was the head nurse. I attended every operation. So she knew I was Jewish. It's a giveaway. In France, that is a giveaway. So, I don't mention this particularly, but I'm just telling you that. But when I speak to these audiences, I want to make sure that they know that we had help when it counted. And speak to younger people, you have to gear it not to shock them too much with some of the gory details. And the story never changes because it's the same story, but it has to be told to fit the audience so that they get the most out of it. And I don't dwell too much on too many details, just the main part. Sometimes I do a talk where I say I want to just give you the most tender, the most exciting, the most scary, the most important, and just pick these. And the best format, the format that I like best, is when the students have already read the book and I have Q&A. I don't have to tell anything. I just want, they want to have they want elucidation on what went on in this situation of that. So that is a very good format when the teachers have already prepared the students and they have prepared questions, and that hour that I spent is all Q&A. And I like that because they know and they want to know more about certain situations in the train, or the escape, or the prison, or the camp, or whatever. But sometimes I get a little tired because it's repetitive and it's always emotional. But you know, I have the choice. I have a choice. I'm fortunate. I have the luxury of a choice. I can say yes, I can say no. And my mother and sisters had no choice. Their voices have been silenced and I have to talk. Whoever does it. There's fewer and fewer of us, you know. Sometimes I get introduced, oh, we are so fortunate to have Leo Bretholz with us because, you know, the survivors won't be with us much longer. They leave us. And when they get introduced like this, I have my perfect intro. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here, it's a privilege, but the way Stanley introduced me, I better talk fast. I like that introduction, gives me the way I'm being introduced gives me the best intro. I better talk fast. And that breaks the ice in a way.
But it doesn't bother you when you get introduced that way? Or you just take it lightly?
I don't know. I really don't like it. None of us like it.
Yeah.
I speak to all of my friends, the survivors, when they get introduced that way. How long does he know he has? Nobody knows how long they have, and that's the good thing. What makes him so special? They're leaving us. Maybe I'm leaving you later than you. You know, whatever. But we feel very, very. It's very almost hurtful awkward to be introduced. They won't be with us much longer.
Mhm.
You know, it's like a curiosity.
It's a little
Another thing I don't like is, Mr. Bretholz, do you have a number? That is voyeurism. That is curiosity. And my answer is, chances are 99 out of 100, if I had been in position to have a number, I wouldn't be here. It's a curiosity. Once, if you don't have a number, you're no longer a real survivor. It's really voyeurism. They have to see it to believe it, because they've been told about it. You know, you understand how it is. And I said, no, I don't have the number because I was lucky enough never get to a death camp. My efforts were directed not to get there, to be one step ahead, not to be caught. That's why I'm telling the story. That's why I'm here. I'm lucky to be here to tell the story. Go ahead, ask questions. Don't let me know.
Did you have another question?
Leo, you talked about audiences and how you gear your stories for different audiences. And this is something we've talked about in class as our students tell to the group at Hillel, which is comprised mostly of students and professors, community members. It's quite different than being at Perry Hall High School, where they're in high school, they have different amounts of knowledge about the Holocaust, they're mostly not Jewish.
You mean Perry Hall?
Right, when our students tell.
Or in Bel Air, John Carroll.
I'm talking about Perry Hall, but I know about John Carroll. Our students haven't performed there.
By the way, Perry Hall had Louise Getchy, and Louise Getchy is now at John
Yes,
Carroll.
I know that. I just met her for the first time, Louise. She's amazing.
A wonderful teacher. She's very much involved, yes.
So my question is, even though it was such a small group with Tova, Jenny, and Amber, they were an audience, just like any audience
It's
you
very
have.
nice, very intimate, and very close, and very face-to-face.
Mhm.
It's very nice. I like that.
So what were your expectations of this audience before they walked in the door, and then when you met them? Two of the students were Jewish, one wasn't. They were all women in their 20s. Why did you wonder why they were taking the class?
You're Jewish, and Jenny also?
Yes.
I didn't know that. See?
So what were your expectations of them before and then once during that first interview?
It was not any different than other interviews that I had had with students in my house. I just knew they were from a college, but I have had students come to the house after I had spoken to the school, and the students told the parents, and that particular student had a project to write about, you know, like an essay about what she or he learned, and then the parents, father or mother or both, brought them to the house to work on that with me. So the visit of these three young ladies to me was nothing new, except that they were from a college which I had never had before. But they were so friendly and so outgoing, and yeah, they were just a nice group of girls. I mean, really enjoyed it. And it's we often talk about when they came here, Leo, you shouldn't have told too many jokes. You always joke around.
What did you think about the approach they had, where they first wanted to focus just on before the war, then the second interview during the war, and the third after? Was that a different experience?
Yeah, there was a little different because they sectionalized it. They put it into, but it's important to know what happened up to, during, and after. That's a very good format because it ties in. You know, the family situation has to be told because you leave your family. For better or worse, you leave your family never knowing whether you'll ever see them again. Then comes the segment of running and escaping and surviving, and naturally. Then you want to know how do you deal with it in the aftermath. It's a very logical and a very, I would say, very intellectual type format, yes. ties in the past with the present and the future. It connects, you know. But these three, they stood out from the others. I would say so. Yes. My wife feels the same way about it.
Was that because of the interview and the way they interviewed, or the performance, or both?
The whole demeanor. It was just like a social visit. Yeah, just chit chat and be there and have a nice couple of hours. Friendly faces. It was very, very nice. We talked about your name, and I knew some other people by the name of Tenenbaum. And Amber told me that she was actually interested in the German language. And I said, why? You know what my grandmother used to say? My grandmother spoke Yiddish. That's how I learned the Yiddish language. My grandmother said, it wasn't hard for me to learn German. Just because German is bad Yiddish. That's what she used to say.
Yeah, she has a good point. And did you also feel that the length of the interviews was a good idea? So to come on 3 occasions, and then and did you kind of get to share what you wanted to share?
Yeah, I had all the opportunity to say whatever I wanted to say, because their questions were very pertinent, and the length doesn't, whatever time is needed, that's what it is. Why do something halfway when you can do it the right way? And they had very good questions, and in fact I was very pleased that they were so incisive and meaningful. That I knew these 3 young ladies knew something, you know. That history didn't just pass them by. They knew what they were. You knew what you were. I can talk to you first, but they're present. You knew what you were doing. You came prepared, and you always had another thing. You had a ready smile. Yeah, ready smile.
Well, we looked forward to it so much.
Well, that was nice when we came to the house. There we were.
Leah, what was it like when you saw Tova's presentation and she was taking off her shoes and saying "flow" and calling out, and all the antics of yours that
when they came to the house, yeah. Well, she acted a lot. She's a little actress. She has a knack for the dramatic. Why not? That adds to it. So this gives it authenticity.
And of course, we who know you, I mean, we really appreciated that too, because we could see you shining through Tova there.
When Uta and I met, that was at the center stage. Remember, you came up there after my talk?
Yeah.
And she said to me, I'm at Goucher, I teach, would you be willing, could you introduce yourself? When was it, like about 10 years ago?
Yeah. And you had, it was 10 years ago. And so I was just taken by your presence. You held the whole audience there in check.
That was the group that, what was it called?
It was after a presentation of Peter Weiss, the investigation.
Yes. The investigation, yeah.
Wow, that charisma and strength.
Well, you were like a celebrity in our class. Everybody knew about you.
Yeah, but they can't prove anything.
That's why we're getting things on videotape. What about when you saw Amber, and she picked a really beautiful section that I think maybe a lot of students wouldn't have picked from all the stories about the violin and your father hiring this musician, and how when Amber told us, she actually held the violin, just as you did the pretend violin.
Yes, well, she picked also a very significant little story, because my father was a man who was there to... My father never went to synagogue. Raised Jewish, he could quote everything out of the Bible because he went to the cheder. But he was, in a way, a free thinker. Maybe what you call it, maybe agnostic. But my mother was the one that kept the tradition. But my father always had a sense of justice. He was also a little bit of a socialist and an activist. But when he saw somebody playing the violin so beautifully, and people tossed him coins, and he had to bend down, almost humble himself, demean himself to pick up a few coins for the nice work that he just did. He walked out to him and said, "You play the violin so beautifully. You don't have to get coins from the people in the upper floors. I can pay you for teaching my son." And you picked up on that. My father was a humanist, very much so. Died, unfortunately, at age 39. But, of course, as you know from the book, he was not really my natural father. You know, that's a soap opera in the book. But he was my father. I knew him as my father. He was good, a good father, a good husband. Of course, he was the father of my two sisters. They came after me. But he was a humanist. He didn't think that this man should demean himself to depend on a few pennies from tossed to him by people who then closed the window and didn't even continue listening to him. He played beautiful violin, played concertos. I was 6, and I studied the violin about 6 and a half maybe, till I was 9. Then when my father died, my mother couldn't afford it any longer. So I gave up the violin lessons, and this is one of my minor regrets. But one of my regrets that I was never able to finish studying the violin, because I like the instrument. But that was a good, you picked a nice moment. But that shows again how sensitive you are. And you with the shoes and the beret, you really did you crossed the T's and dotted the I's. Yeah.
To me, it's always amazing when people listen to the same story, or when students listen to seemingly the same story, how different the presentations then are, and everybody takes something that speaks to them. And I think that is also one of the beauties of this project, to really individualize your individual story even further, but make it so relevant that everybody can relate to it. I think that is where we've seen that your story has so many perspectives and angles. And I think
Well, every story is like, we may say in the metaphor, one piece, a tile in the mosaic. Then you put them all together and you get the whole picture. But they all tie in. They deal with family, they deal with emotions, they deal with opportunities, with fears, with hardships. Listen, in Vichy France during that period, there was hardly a night when we didn't go to bed hungry. And today, Flo tells me, because you're relatively healthy at your age is because during those 7 years you didn't eat butter and meat and fat. You were rationed, so you didn't eat all the harmful things. Perhaps that's what helped you to starve yourself a little bit and live longer or whatever. But that's possible. Yeah, these were tough days. The Vichy regime did. They were just as vicious. Pétain was sentenced. There's a book out, the 23 days after trial of Pétain. written by a fellow by the name of Jules Leroy, R-O-Y. Jules Leroy is a military man and also a very good writer. And he was every day of the 23 days at that court, in that courtroom when Pétain was tried in Paris. And Pétain had a defense, Philippe Pétain, the Marshal. He was the hero of the First World War, the Battle of Verdun. Well, he had a defense. He said, I actually committed sabotage. It's all in that book. And the judge wanted to know, Marshal, could you please explain that? I said, sure. The Germans asked me to send 2 million guest workers from France to Germany, for labor. I only sent them 600,000. And the judge said, you really mean that to be your defense? He says, yes, Your Honor. I'll consider that sabotage. It was Vichy France. And the Vichy French had such awful laws that often the German command, you know that, from Paris, had to admonish them and warn them, don't go so far with your laws because you're giving us a bad name. They wanted to be in France as gentlemen occupiers, because eventually Hitler was envisioning Paris to be the capital of the new Europe as a vengeance for the Treaty of Versailles. Remember that picture where he stands in Paris, like with one leg lifted, almost like he's doing a dance? That's that famous picture of Hitler standing there, going lifting one leg, and stand in front of the Eiffel Tower and going like this. But he felt that Paris would be to get even with the Treaty of Versailles.
Leo, I've heard that about a bit Vichy France being worse. Why? Do we know any of why the
Well, that was not Pétain's doing, that was Pierre Laval, the Prime Minister. Pierre Laval was a dyed-in-the-wool fascist. And he wanted to accommodate because he saw there was going to be a new Europe, and he wanted to play a part in that new Europe. There was another fascist in Spain by the name of Franco. But Franco, although he sent a division to the Eastern Front, to the Russian front, they called the Azul. Azul means blue in Spanish, the blue division to the Eastern Front. But he actually detested Hitler. He knew who Hitler was. And Franco had a law that if somebody got into Spain, fleeing Vichy France, and he was 50 kilometers into the country, he could no longer be sent back. If you were by the border, entering in court, you would be sent back. But because he was a Latin, you know, the Latins and the Germans didn't go that much well together, but he reckoned.
We're almost out of this tape, so in a minute we're going to have to...
It would be very important for this documentary or this program to be sent to Ahmadinejad, to Iran, to give him an education. You see, because he says the Holocaust didn't happen, and I have to say the world is also flat, you know. So, but this young man from Cairo, he knows the truth now, and he tells me he will pass on the truth, that Kamal will pass on the truth. But 19 years old.
So, when I was thinking about when at the very beginning, right after the class, it was like this whirlwind of activity, and I was so excited. Like each time we got to do a talk, all different places, like the high school, and when I flew up to I can't remember the name of the college right now. Wesleyan in Connecticut, and got to speak there. And also I got to speak for the women's organization? The Hadassah in Pikesville. And then, you know, it's sort of my opportunities to do that died out, and like now I'm sort of, you know, thinking about that, and like those things I did and everything I did surrounded by this class. Like I think of as the most valuable thing that I did at Goucher, and the thing that I think of the most, and I look back upon fondly. But, you know, like, thinking about it is one thing, whereas, like, acting on it is another. And I was wondering what, what you hope we'll continue to do in the future. Like, how do you want us to carry this forward?
Well, you just carry it forward the way you've been carrying it up to now, with all your interests and your very incisive questions and your aim to make this go into the future for what reason? To make sure these things should never happen again. You just keep doing what you have been doing, and we have to really consider one main thing. How did it all start? Elie Wiesel always has a question. When you leave this room after my talk, and you come home and you think about it, you will still not have the answer to one little question. Why? That has never been answered. And how did it all start? It didn't start with killing. It started with words. Hitler was elected. He didn't force himself on the German people. He was elected by a majority. Why? With words. And the words turned into action. We have to be careful for the words. We have to parse these words. We have to analyze them immediately, what they really mean. We want to point out something. Die Juden sind unser Unglück. The Jews are our misfortune, all plastered over the walls. Juden nach Palästina, Jews to Palestine. Immanuel Kant, the philosopher, was anti-Semitic. His pronouncements were always that way. When he got real mean, he said, let's send these Palestinians back where they came from, when he talked about the Jews. Words are very dangerous, and they lead to action. And that's what we have to watch out for. The propaganda said the Jews were responsible for the First World War. Then we have a saying in Yiddish: the Jew is the lid that fits every pot. Der Deckel, was passt jeden Topf in Yiddish. Why? When the communists wanted to attack the West, they said, the Western Jewish imperialists, fascists. When the fascists wanted to attack the Russians, they said, the socialist, communist, Jewish conspiracy. We fit every part. When Hitler said Jews were responsible for Versailles and all that, the war and everything, what he didn't tell, and this is so important for students to know, Germany had a population of 60 million. 1% were Jewish, 600,000. 1% were Jewish, 600,000. I want to give you a lopsided number. 20% of the Jewish population served under the German colors in the First World War. 120,000. Of those, 10% either were killed or came home maimed for life. That was a great contribution by the Jews, but Hitler would never recognize that the Jews were responsible for our defeat. Propaganda. It started with words. And this is what you're going to pass on to students. When you hear words, analyze them. Because what is a demagogue? A demagogue speaks words that he not absolutely believes in himself, but he thinks that the people want to hear. He may not believe it, but that's good for them. to get the people to support him. That's what they want to hear. And this is what you got to watch out for. This is where it all began, with words. The question why will never be answered. Why to the extreme by murdering people? Innocent people. Why did my sisters have to be killed, murdered? The answer will never be, that question will never be answered. But that's very important to remember, and I think this is the lesson to pass on to young people, to students. Watch out for words. It can be very glib, very misleading, and very self-serving. But what they really mean is, follow me and I'll show you the way, even if it means murder. That's the history is full of that. Attila the Hun and Genghis Khan, and then in the modern world, as I say when I speak, the nation of poets and thinkers and philosophers, and Bach and Brahms and Beethoven. That nation could descend into this depth. Words, they're more dangerous than anything else. History tells you that. I think so.
And not doing anything about it.
And you have to do
yeah,
so.
so the indifference.
Good people have to stand up and do something, have to recognize it. Politicians come and go. You know, when I was naturalized in this country in 1952, I've been here 62 years. In 52 I became naturalized, and I think every person in this country, even native people, should go through a process of naturalization, because you learn something. You were naturalized.
Not yet.
Not
I have yet to learn it.
you still can. So when you take your get your lessons and you get examined, and then comes a joke after that. When you get examined, and you go before the district judge, and he makes you sit as you get your papers. This is usually done not by one or two or three people, but a group of people. When I became naturalized in July of 1952, that was the month that we were married also. We were married 57 years. So the judge said to us, the countries that you came from, there was the personality cult. You heard words, you heard speeches, you heard propaganda. You saw the picture of the Kaiser hanging all over the place, and the picture of Mussolini and Hitler and the Tsar. Not in America. We have a president, and he lives in the White House. And the White House is owned by the people. You are the landlords, and he is your tenant. And if he doesn't behave, in 4 years, you evict him. That was the judge told us. Really. I never forget these words. You evict him. We have one-term presidents and we have two-term presidents, but if he doesn't behave, you evict him. And the joke is this. A woman from Germany, immigrant, comes before the test judge, the examiner, and he gives it the questions. Then there's a question. Do you know, he asked her, the name of the first president of the United States? She says, sure, Washington, with her accent, Washington. He says, no, I want the complete name. She says, Washington Heights. That's a section in New York where the immigrants used to live. She says, Washington Heights.
Now I know how to answer that question. They ask me.
Tell her to add.
Leah, when you were just talking about the power of words and the tragedy that words have brought about. Well, in our class, we talk so much about the power of words and in a different way of listening to your words and of listening to their own intuition, and to bring that out in words and images and pictures.
Instincts.
And, I'm sorry?
Instincts.
So that they can use their words to create a different kind of power to pass on the story. So I want to ask Amber and Tova when you use those words that you worked on so hard, those images that were so embedded in your brain and you had to use words and actions to bring out, what was it like to perform in these different venues? Were you received? Did you feel that? Honestly, you may have mixed feelings. Perry Hall, Hillel, for you, Hadassah, Wesleyan, and then having Leo there when you were telling this. So I'd love to get your input.
Do you want to go first?
Okay. Well, I remember the Perry Hall one, and I was kind of scared because it was a bunch of high school students, and I didn't know how much they knew or how interested they'd be. But it went really well, and they were intrigued, and they listened, and they looked. They weren't looking at other things. But when I did the ones in Hillel, all that mattered was Leo, and I don't remember how everyone else reacted. It didn't matter. I was performing for Leo, and I mean, it did matter what they thought, but that was my audience, and that's who I had to perform to.
Very nice. You did well.
Thank you.
Yeah, like, well, I changed my story a lot based on the audience, even to the point where, like, I remember going into the Perry Hall one, I was really nervous about how it would be received. And it was a 10th grade English class, and I remember when we came into the room, there was this one kid who the whole time he had his head down, and he was like rocked back in his chair, and he was just like leaning over the desk. Like, I didn't think he took in a single word I said. But I made your story a little bit more like sensationalist, because I thought, maybe I'll just catch their attention, and they'll think, this is interesting, because in so many ways, like, the stories of your escapes, like, it sounds like an action adventure, especially to a high school student. And so I remember afterwards, when I finished, I still wasn't sure how they received it. And then the kid who'd had his head down the whole time, he put his hand up and he goes, wait, so he escaped from a moving train? He jumped off a moving train? Like, it was the coolest thing he'd ever heard. And so I thought that was very interesting to see how he received that. And then at the Hadassah, it was very interesting because it was mostly female audience. And so, their responses were a little more emotional than, than I'd seen with the other audiences.
Did you meet at somebody's house?
It was at the Hadassah in Pikesville. And also, my cousin came to see it. And that was really cool for me to have her see that, because I really wanted people in my life to see it. Like, I really wanted my mom to see it, my sister to see it, I did do it for them, but it's not the same as for a group. And then, but really, the most important one to me was, like Amber said, was when you were sitting there, and I was watching you the whole time. Like, I wasn't really looking at anyone else. So.
You wasted all that time.
No. But yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was very emotional. Yeah, very emotional.
And I just
Always is emotional. Yeah.
And I remembered we did one for Mr. Manischewitz too, and I remember that Jennifer asked me to do it. And normally I don't like speaking in public. I don't like getting up in front of people. But since Leo had seen my story and he seemed to really like it, I just got up there. And I've never been so confident in front of people in my life. And
I launched you in a new career.
It was true for me too. I really didn't like public speaking, and I was shocked at how, I guess, easily it came to me. And this particular, something that is unique about it that really made me, because we were never following a script. It changed every time, and it was just like having this confidence in my knowledge about your life based on the things you told me, and having confidence in my ability to change the story, because I felt like I knew your story so well at that point.
I think what made it easier for people who don't like that is that it wasn't about us, it was about the story.
Exactly.
And so we were just the vehicle, and it wasn't me, it was the story that was being presented. So
Keep in mind, we're telling one story. And what we have to also keep in mind, that there are so many that have never been told. When Spielberg finished his project with the Shoah, and I was one of the interviewers, he did 58,000 interviews, and when it was finished, he said, "We haven't got the whole thing yet. The mosaic will never be completed." Because some people are no longer here, others can't remember, others don't want to talk. There's all kinds of reasons, but we still have many that are not on record. But we do the best we can with what we have. But speaking about me, there are many people out there who have many stories, and each story is different, and each story has its own merit, its own worth, its own situation. That's what's important. Appreciate your efforts with me and with the others that you did here, whom I know also, they're my friends. But there's so many out there that are yet to be told, and I don't think will ever be told. That's part of time going by, you know. But so far what you have done is very important. And I know you're going to carry it on in the future, not just going to let it be, let this be the final exclamation point. I know you're taking it into the future. Whoever you're going to talk to, and what you're going into, what field are you going into? I know you're doing social work, and you don't know yet. Maybe you want to be a history teacher. Maybe you want to teach German.
Yeah, I think she should.
Vielleicht doch. Das ist auch eine Möglichkeit.
Mal sehen.
Werden wir sehen, ja. She's heading that way. Mit die Umlaute und so weiter.
And Leo, would you, for instance, what you're saying is the acknowledgement of all those other stories. Would this be something that you would want those students then to say before they present your story, or is it just something that you would all of us to know?
No, that's just want you to know, and if a student ever speaks about it, they can easily introduce it. You're telling one story, but this is just one thread in the tapestry. There's so many out there, and every story in its own, has its own impact, its own meaning, and because everyone is different. Some of them are similar, but they're still different. You see, when I speak to students, I was guided across the river by Mr. Becker, right? I was helped to go into Switzerland by a guide. But then I speak to students, I never call him guide. You know what I call him? Smuggler. Why? The ears perk up when you say smuggler. Oh, now it's getting interesting. A guide is a guide, you know, and a guide is a map quest. But when you say smuggler, oh, he was smuggled, right? But when you go illegally across the border, it's smuggling. But the fellow that leads you is a guide. But when you call him a smuggler, they get interested. It makes it more adventurous.
Leo, is there any suggestions you have for us, for Uta and myself and Steve as the teachers of the class, and well, to help us as we bring the next group of students? We have 16 young women this year taking this class, the most ever. Is there anything we can do to make this, to improve this class, to make more certain that your story will continue to be told? What can we do to make
But
this?
it's not just my story, you have others also.
Right, all of you. No, I mean that.
You have, so far your efforts have been rewarded. How can you improve on something that is already very successful? Really. You can, depending on the audience also. If you see that their interest is piqued, maybe you want to go into more political detail or more history of, maybe tell them that Hitler was elected, you know, to make a point that this danger is always present with us, that somebody can be elected because of the propaganda. But I think you should just do what you have been doing so far, really. How can you... Don't fix it if it ain't broken. You know.
It's you can't get a much better compliment from being told that this is a
No,
successful
it
project by
It
a
is,
survivor.
it is, and the proof it, you see it, you know, the interest that it has created, and you get 16 enrollments, and for how long will that go on? Like,
How long will the class? Well, this year will be through December. We
So
just
December.
started. It's
you're
each year,
teaching, you're teaching.
and we
All-
hope it will go on as long as we can. We hope
All women?
it happens to be all women for the first time. It's usually mostly women because of Goucher's population. But to have, when Billy, our videographer here today, who we're not seeing because he's behind the camera, when he was in the class, the year Tova and Amber were, he was only one of 2 of 12, of 13, who were men. But yeah, one year we only had one of 9, but this year we have 16. And we have our smallest number of Jewish students this year. 6 out of 16.
16.
Usually out of 16 it would be about 12, 10 to 12. So the wonderful thing is we have all these non-Jewish students so interested.
You know whose daughter went here? Larry King's. Larry King's daughter went to Goucher.
I did not know that. There's
Chaya.
always amazing,
Her name is-
fascinating people here.
Her name is Chaya. He told me that. I was on his program in 88, evening program. And he said, "You're from Baltimore?" I said, "Yes." He says, "My daughter studied at Goucher." Yeah. And you know who I spoke to here? What's the fella, the redhead fella, the teacher? Short fella, curly head.
Oh, Joe Morton.
Joe Morton.
He's now white. The hair is white, not red anymore.
I also have a little silver highlight. So, to get my hair cut, I always ask the hairdresser to give me a little silver highlight. And Joe Morton, and then I also spoke a couple of times when Rabbi Berlin was teaching here.
From Ohab Shalom?
Yeah, he was teaching here religious history. And
When was
he
that?
invited me some 12, 15 years ago. Invited me here twice to speak to his class. And at one time he had his mother visiting here from upstate New York, and he brought her with her. Yeah.
And I remember you were speaking at Beth Israel for the 8th through 10th graders 3 years ago, I think the year before you all, and 3 of our students performed after you.
Yeah, this was Rabbi
It's
Esrog.
2007.
Was Esrog still alive at the time?
No, he wasn't alive at that point. It was, and Rachel Glazer, the principal who adores you, went here.
Oh, she adores me, and I never
She
knew that.
adores you. She thinks you're phenomenal.
She adores me, yeah.
And she's a Goucher alum as well.
Now I can sleep quietly.
So you have more speaking
Rachel
engagement
Glazer.
this fall?
Yeah, a few. At Notre Dame, the Renaissance group, Mothers Home Talk Children's Group, and a Westminster St. John's Church, the Carroll County Library staff. From all the libraries, they gather them at the St. John's Church in Westminster, and we'll do a talk there sometime in November. I have a few scheduled, and a few I have just declined because I can't do it all. But whatever I had already on schedule, Flo says I shouldn't change it.
I have a thought. I'm going to put 2 people in this room on the spot, Leo and Amber.
Yeah.
I'm just going to put it out there as something
Don't do it.
to mull over.
Don't do
No, you
it.
don't have to answer.
You might regret it.
I don't think I will. Maybe. When this class got started, it's based on a class in Pittsburgh, that University of Pittsburgh and some Holocaust survivors there.
When those 17 women?
I don't know how many people.
No, I mean the class. You mean the class that you
No,
started this week?
Our
This
class
whole-
that we're in right
the
now.
project, so
You know,
to
the
say.
whole project. So back 7 years ago and before, this went on in Pittsburgh for a few years. It never became as involved as it has here at Goucher. One of the things they did that we haven't done is they had the students go with the survivor and hear them speak to a group several times. And when the survivor and the student were ready, it may have been earlier in the process than Amber and Tova are now. They would tell a piece of the story along with the survivor being there and answering questions. So I'm just wondering, since Amber is in Baltimore right now, if it worked out schedule-wise and transportation-wise for her to come and actually hear you, at the least, just to come and be there and to be introduced as someone who's going to continue telling this story now and forevermore.
But what you will hear will be the same stories she's heard already.
Right, but she'll learn by hearing it from you directly, and the students, I think, would be so fascinated to see this young woman taking the story. So it's just something that I think to offer.
Sometimes the other groups at Renaissance is all adults. It's not students and the other library personnel. But we'll see.
You could always let each other know, and if I can help with transportation, if you're interested, just let me know, because I think hearing the students hearing you in front of a group adds something, just like having the intimacy gives them something the group will never have. Seeing you with the group is something they haven't had. Just
Do you know, I have to say that. Every time you mention survivor, to some people that the connotation is of something special. In most of the cases, when I start to talk, I have just been introduced as a survivor, and I want you to know that I do not exalt in that term at all. Nothing special. It's just very lucky. We are all survivors. You are all survivors in the realm of things. Because if this evil had triumphed, we would not be sitting here discussing things openly and freely, and it would be a different world. That was the conquest. Wir werden weiter marschieren, because you know German. I don't want to sing it, because I don't want to bother you. Wir werden weiter marschieren, bis alles zusammenfällt. Heute gehört uns Deutschland und morgen die ganze Welt. We will continue to march until everything crumbles, because today Germany belongs to us and tomorrow the whole world. That's what they were singing, the Hitler Youth. So we are all survivors. We are all survivors, really. History tells you that. If it had turned out differently, we would not be sitting here now and discussing. Wir werden weiter marschieren. I saw it with my own eyes. I heard it. It scared us. And yet, when I heard it, I didn't realize that there was history in the making. To me, this was just like, I'm seeing something like an adventure. There's a curiosity. But there was history in the making. That's what we're talking about. You're passing it on to the students, and when you have children, to your own children. You do the best that you can, and if you do what you have done up to now, you're getting A+.
Tova, do you see in Pittsburgh, do you see a chance to tell stories at all at the university, or is there, since it really originated actually?
I didn't know
never
that.
thought of that.
I mean, because Pittsburgh wasn't on my radar when you had originally told us that's where it started. I had no idea that it was at Pitt.
It was at the University of Pittsburgh, but it was connected to the Holocaust Center in Pittsburgh, which at the time was run by Linda. You've said what you need to say. Anyone else have anything they want to offer? Well, I will end and just thank you so much, Leo, for taking the time with us. Thank you, Tova, for coming in from Pittsburgh. And this just is another example of the relationships that are formed in our class and with our students, between the students and survivors, to take the time when you are now working on a master's degree and moving on with your life, that this will always be a part of your life, this experience here at Goucher, as you said so beautifully. And Leo is part of you. And as Amber wrote in her paper, just how much this story is part of her and how she will continue to tell it. And Uta, thank you for making this happen.
Thanks for all your
Yay.
I
postcards.
am so grateful to all of you. It really is very, very special. And even if we might be all survivors, you are the most special one.
To us.
Appreciate it.
We've learned so much from you, and that helps us to pass it on.
Thank you, Larko. I'm glad I have the voice and the ability to pass it on. Some people just can't talk about it, but I have to, because do that for the voices that have been silenced, like my mother and sisters. And that's what is important, right? Pass it on.
Thank you, and thank you, Billy, for being here too.
As I say, I have a choice, yes or no, but when I say yes, I know I want to pass it on, so. And on that note, alles Beste, all the best. And
Sei
have-
gesund.
Sei
As we
gesund.
say in Cairo.
Sei gesund, as they say in Cairo, sei gesund. And
And Lehitro, as they say in
Lehitro.
Israel.
and have a good holiday,
Yes.
appreciate that.
Sweet New Year.
Sweet New Year to you. And you can also have a Rosh Hashanah.
It's always good to have a good year.
Bill, thanks for your expertise.
Thank you.
Guys.
And Uta, thanks for the
So-
cheese.